this is that very simple luxury choice. Isn't too expensive, isn't too flashy. Today I'm behind the wheel of a 2022 Lexus RX 350, and we're going to explore how it stacks up against some of its competition and what it really stands for, why it's still a relevant SUV in the market. And if you guys enjoyed this content, do me a favor, throw it a like and subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this. Without further ado, let's get out onto the road. So setting off here in the RX 350, this is immediately and very apparently so a very, very Japanese product, very Japanese luxury SUV. And that is to say it is reliable. It features a solid amount of tech and or amenities, either standard or for a fairly reasonable price. And on top of all of that, it's not quite as refined as its German counterparts. So again, more reliable, but a bit less refined. And I'll get into that in a moment, but I want to tap into price. So the RX 350 here in front wheel drive starts at just over $45,000. And as equipped, this car is actually a pretty reasonable $50,500, which is not too bad compared to its competition, which again, we'll get into in a moment. But something else to note is that there are actually now a solid amount of variants of the RX available. So you can get the base RX 350 that we have here. Then for about $1,500 more, you can get it in an all-wheel drive form versus this front-wheel drive. Then, including the option to pick between front-wheel drive and all-wheel drive, you can get it in an F-Sport trim for about $3,000 more, which is sportier trim. You get sportier seats, a more aggressive exterior body kit, and a couple other little touches. Now there's also a new L model to only further complicate things. That is the exact same wheelbase, but has a slightly longer length and features a third row. And finally, there is a hybrid, a 450 hybrid, which it itself gets either an L, a standard, or an F Sport. So yeah, there's a ton of options, but because we're here now in like the most basic, affordable, least expensive, whatever RX model, we're just gonna focus on this. And you do get a good amount of stuff for your money, and I don't think any of the issues I have with this car go away by it being either all-wheel drive, sportier, or a hybrid. So yeah, let's tap in. So we know that it's about $50,000, which is pretty good against the competition, which in my eyes is the likes of an Infiniti QX60, a BMW X5, a Mercedes GLE. I'd also throw in the Jaguar F-Pace and the Volvo XC90. So definitely compared to the vast majority of those cars, this is a more affordable luxury SUV. The Mercedes and the BMW, even with just a few options, are well into the $60,000 range. The Jaguar is a bit more expensive than this as well, and so is the Volvo if optioned up. With, the point is, this is reasonably priced for the segment for a luxury SUV, a mid-size luxury SUV. I like that you have some options. Personally, when it comes to mid-size SUVs, I prefer the 5-seat configurations. I don't think those third rows are very useful, even for kids. Probably you'd have to be under 10 years old to be able to use that. So really, I like to keep it like this, and compared to most of the competition, this actually has an exceptionally comfortable second row. Definitely more so than the BMW and the Mercedes, which are the two competitors I'm the most familiar with personally. So you get a bit more space, and actually behind me, and I'm 6'2", just about, I can easily fit behind myself. I can imagine someone up to about 6'7", 6'8", fitting behind me pretty comfortably. Maybe headroom being a slight issue at that height, but plenty of leg room, very comfortable. And as is the front. Here, this car is clearly very comfort oriented, which is why you see a bit of an older clientele kind of lean towards this car. It's a sensible choice too. It's a Lexus, so again, it's a Toyota product, it's a Japanese product, it's very reliable, comfortable, simple. The front seats are very, very comfy, probably more so than any of the cars that I mentioned, any of the competition. And Lexus typically stands out in my eyes for having some of the best seats in the whole industry, so it's no surprise that I'm very comfy, chilling, riding around in the RX. But the refinement does become an issue here and there. For instance, while I have really large side view mirrors, the mirror itself tends to shake a little bit, vibrate a little bit when I'm driving if I hit any sort of bump or undulation. And that really doesn't feel like quality. That doesn't feel like something you expect in any car, let alone a $50,000 car. On top of that, some of the material use isn't so great. The door handles, which are something you have to use every single time you get in and out of the car here on the inside, they feel flimsy and cheap and very plasticky and like something you'd expect to find in a 20-year-old Honda more than what you'd expect to find in, say, again, a Mercedes GLE right now. So still focusing on the interior here. Besides the terrible Lexus trackpad, you get this 90s, early 2000s style Mercedes shifter still here in this Lexus, but you do get what seem to be a standard heated and cooled seats. And again, that's just something that's a true strength here of this car. The amenities you get automatic or auto high beams on the headlights, you get a heated steering wheel, all standard. So those are really nice features you don't get standard in most of this car's competition. You also get 3 memory settings here for the front driver's seat. So again, just true strengths, blind spot detection, standard. But you have this very strange matte wood on the steering wheel, which feels very slippery. And when I first got in this car, I thought it was just like matte black plastic trim, and that's really what it feels like. The leather that you get here in the center portion feels much better, and I wish it was just leather wrapped all the way through. You do still also get the clock here, the classic Lexus clock on the interior, which is ridiculous, but at least you have the time here in the center screen of your gauge cluster, and Apple CarPlay shows you the time as well. So you don't have to worry about this clock too much while you're driving, trying to read the time on an analog clock. And the very last thing, I mentioned the door handles, but when you shut this door, you really slam this door closed, it sounds like the sheet metal is rippling, and it's like this hollow, awful sound, and it's probably single-handedly the worst part of the driving experience of this car, is shutting the door and hearing that sound. And it's like, it doesn't sound like a solid thump that you get from most of the time from German vehicles. So those kind of little touches, that's really where this kind of falls flat on its face compared to the competition. But the price point and the reliability really shine through here, as does that rear seat legroom. Now, something interesting to note for me is that I've driven both the NX, the Lexus NX, and the Toyota RAV4, and those share a platform, and they're slightly smaller. They're like compact SUVs versus this being a midsize SUV. The NX is almost as big, has a pretty potent 2-liter turbo, and while it feels just a touch bit less luxurious than this, I don't think this is worth over $10,000 more, especially when you consider this is a fairly base front-wheel drive. You're comparing it kind of directly to a front-wheel drive, more or less base NX. I don't know if this is worth it just for the screen and stuff, and I think you can even get a pretty big screen now in the new NXs. So that's something to note. You know, this feels a lot more similar to that RAV4 that I drove a couple months ago than not. And for almost 2 times the price, again, I don't know if I would spend that money to jump into this. Again, aside from, you know, the higher use of materials and luxury, but other than that, it doesn't feel much more special. Even here on the left side panel here, you have buttons that feel fairly similar to that Toyota. And, you know, you still have this terrible trackpad. Luckily, the screen, which is a lovely screen, it's part of one of the only options this car has, a $2,200 navigation package. You get this 12.3-inch screen and an upgraded sound system and this moonroof. Yeah, the screen is fantastic. It has Apple CarPlay. It's massive. It's a little far to reach. You know, you got to lean forward, but you get touchscreen Apple CarPlay on a massive screen. Always great. It kind of has finally equalized all cars' infotainment systems, because you don't have to really worry about if Lexus is really crappy UI here with this track. You don't have to worry about it. Just plug in your phone. I'm sure, I believe it has Android Auto as well, but for most of us that have iPhones, plug it in, you're done. I mean, you're set. Maps are right there, your music's right there, your phone's right there, you're good. So that kind of thing is nice. You have analog gauges, so you get something that feels, you know, simple enough, luxurious enough, but again, does cost a bit more than the products it feels more similar to in the NX and the RAV4, which is a downside, but offers you some more luxury at a lower price than some of its competition. So in that sense, it does sit kind of in the middle nicely, but for me, I'd have a hard time picking this over the likes of, say, a Q5 even. Although this is a bit larger and the trunk is certainly a bit larger than a Q5, I still would have a hard time picking this over that, because that feels like a more quality product in my eyes. I just realized I forgot to mention the power plant, and I'm here at a light, so we will actually take off hard at this light, and then we'll break down the power numbers after that. This does 0 to, wheel spin. This does 0 to 60 in kind of slow. Still climbing, and there's 60. Yeah, it's not super fast. That wheel spin was funny. I wasn't even expecting that. I forgot this is front wheel drive. But it's, you know, it's acceptable for what it is. But let's get to the power figures. So this has a 3.5 liter naturally aspirated 6-cylinder motor producing 295 horsepower and 268 pound-feet of torque, which is actually not too bad again for what this car is. And that NA power, I mean, it provides a very linear power band. At the same time, so many of the other cars I've mentioned, so much of this car's competition doesn't even come with any sort of NA power plant optional. And there's pros and cons. One of the biggest pros of this is reliability, which again is a tenet of this being a Japanese vehicle. I could much more easily imagine a vehicle like this making it past 100,000 miles with very little issues. Whereas as you creep towards 100,000 miles, a lot of those German cars and even British cars begin to have little issues or require more intensive maintenance. But the downside is you don't get quite as much power, certainly not as much torque or as much of a punchy power band midway through or towards the bottom end, and you get a inferior fuel economy because the turbo obviously helps with efficiency. So this does a bit poorer than, again, the likes of even an all-wheel drive X5. So those are, you know, that is some food for thought. But again, this is that very simple luxury choice that isn't too expensive, isn't too flashy. The looks are okay. It has that now iconic Lexus grille up front, which does work better on these SUVs than in my opinion, than it does on most of the sedans or coupes. But you still have a bit of a funky look. You have a weird window back here, or a weird window element there past the C-pillar. So you get some funky looks, but it's still very Lexus, very Japanese, and not, again, too flashy. And now this brings me, as I'm about to conclude the video, to my favorite part of the whole video, which is the Tallboy test. So let's check out how this Lexus RX 350 stacks up. Okay, so now that we've seen the Tallboy test performance, I want to conclude this video by mentioning something that I really didn't like about this car's overall drivability. So visibility is solid, the power plant is solid. We've kind of gone through that. Nothing to write home about, but nothing also to be majorly disappointed by. The one thing is, because the suspension is set up to be comfortable while we're here on a very smooth road, a recently repaved road, it's great. But I noticed on the freeway at higher speeds, around 65, 70 miles an hour, if there are any of those expansion joints or undulations on the freeway, this thing just balances and balances and balances and balances so much that it begins to become nauseating. And that is really disappointing. Obviously, it depends on your driving conditions and where you live, but it was extremely apparent on the freeway last night. And it was disappointing, of course, because while I know the intention and the suspension's been set up to be comfortable, that was the exact opposite of comfortable. I would have preferred a super stiff suspension that wasn't just bouncing like I was on a boat. So that is something I have to mention here at the end, especially if you made it this far. I'm guessing you're seriously considering this car. So maybe go test drive one in your local area and see how you feel. Here we go in speed bump. Not too bad. But with all of that said, if you guys enjoyed the video, please, please, please consider subscribing. New videos are dropping every single week. And comment down below. Let me know what videos you guys want to see or what cars you guys want to see. I'll do my best to make it happen. As always, this is Rio. Peace out.